Hey BootTube, I'm continuing with a part 2 on my 4 suspects who I believe Negan could have killed in the end of season 6 and who will we see in the beginning of season 7. I left off with my 4th suspect, which to me is the least likely to be the one Negan killed, being Maggie Green. And like I said in the previous video, if you did not catch it, I only put Maggie there because a lot of people have pointed out, like they screenshot the carnage and they pointed out that there's like an object inside the carnage and they believe it's Maggie's ring. It does in fact look like it from far away a little bit, but the reason why I'm saying I don't think it's her is because of what Negan said when he was beating the heck out of the victim at the end of season 6. He was very surprised and actually kind of happy and gleeful when he was whacking the victim, because he's like, ooh, this person still standing, even after all these hits, they're still fighting, they're still standing, they're still alive, still kicking and everything, right? When Negan said that, I immediately cut Maggie out of that, because remember at the end of season 6, before they got, captured by Negan, Maggie seemed to be having complications with her baby, and she was really sickly and pale. And the reason why I'm saying this is because when Negan first hit the victim, he was so surprised that the person was still not really standing, but you know what I mean, was still kicking, you know what I mean? Still alive. Still, like, taking the hits, right? If Maggie was, in fact, Negan's victim, I think Maggie would have died after one hit from Lucille, because she was very weak and frail from her complications with her pregnancy, that if Negan hit her at least once with Lucille, she would have already been dead, like KO, which pretty much contradicts what happened when we saw Negan hit that victim the first time and said, "Ooh, still kicking, still alive," right? Because if it was Maggie, with her frail health, she would have already been dead after the first hit. So that's why I don't think it's Maggie. Despite the ring thing, I don't think it's her, because if Negan hit her on one hit, she would have already died. She would have already died. She would have not got up from what hit. And from what Negan said, after the one hit, that person was still alive and still fighting and taking those hits. So that's why I don't think Maggie's the victim. And also the fact that the blood smear on Rick's face. Yes, Maggie is in fact on Rick's right side, where, the blood smear on Rick's face is, and the fact that Maggie was literally sitting next to Rick, but that's also another reason why I don't think it's Maggie. If Maggie wasn't the victim, I've never really, bashed someone's head in with a barbed wire covered bat, but I would suspect that if it was Maggie, there would be more blood on Rick. Because, like I said, Maggie is sitting right next to Rick on his right side. And if her head got bashed in by Lucille, there would be more than just that blood smear on Rick's right side of his face. There'd be more blood. Because Maggie was literally right next to him. And his right side should have been like covered more in blood if Maggie was the victim. But anyway, yeah, there you go on why I thought maybe Maggie and why I also didn't think it was Maggie. Contradict that Maggie, those Maggie people who think that she got killed. But anyway, going to number 3, who I think is the next least likely, but more likely than Maggie, believe it or not, Glenn. I will tell you here and now why. Hang on. Glenn. Okay. Originally, when I first heard of Negan, because I read the comics, I instantly believed that Glenn, his luck is running out. He's going to die. Because if you have not read the comics, spoiler alert, in the comic, Negan, pretty much like in the show, he does in fact kill someone in the group, and in the comic, that unfortunate soul is in fact Glenn Rhee, and this is the main reason why Glenn was by far my first pick on who got killed, mainly because of that. Mainly because Glenn is the victim of Negan in the comics. And there were several hints to his possible demise by Negan. My most favorite clue was, remember when they believed they infiltrated the stronghold of Negan and Glenn for the first time actually killed a living human being and not a walker, right? He saw a bunch of Polaroids on the wall where they were all Negan and Lucille's victims, all their heads bashed in and everything. He was looking at it, and it was pretty much, in a way, it was kind of like foreshadowing for Glenn, which did not help even more to the fact that Glenn is the original victim of Negan and Lucille in the comics, right? But here is where that actually contradicts. Hang on. This is where it actually contradicts. Where is it? I believe there's a possibility that Glenn's comic book death by Negan Lucille might get swapped with someone else in the show. Why I think this, an example of that, would have to be Abraham. In the comic books, Abraham gets killed because he gets shot in the eye with an arrow. Does that sound familiar to you guys who've only watched the show? That's how Denise, that one doctor from Alexandria, died. Remember, Denise was out on a run with Daryl and Rosita, and she ended up getting killed because she got shot in the eye, and we find out that it was Dwight who had Daryl's crossbow. He was using Daryl's crossbow from a distance because he wanted to kill Daryl, but he ended up missing. Instead, he hit Denise in the eye and she died. That death by arrow in the eye, is how Abraham dies in the comics. But instead of Abraham dying that way in the show like he did in the comics, that got passed down to Denise, right? So I'm thinking maybe, since Glenn was the obvious victim in the comics to Negan and Lucille, maybe they're like, oh, that's way too easy, For the people who read the comics, that's way too easy of a guess for it to be Glenn. So of course maybe they want to change it up, so not only are people shocked, the people who don't read the comics shocked, but the people who read the comics will be shocked too, because the people who read the comics are all anticipating it to be Glenn, because that's who they saw die in the comics, right? The same way they thought Abraham was going to die by getting shot in the eye, because that's what happened in the comics. But what happened? Abraham did not die from getting shot in the eye like he did in the comics. He's still alive, and Denise got that death. So maybe they might change it up, and instead of Glenn getting his comic book death realized in the show, they might swap him for someone else, just like they did with Abraham and Denise, right? And another example, Carol and Sophia. In the comic books, Carol died, I believe, even before Alexandria. You guys can quote me on that, but I know for a fact in the comic book, Carol died a while ago already, right? And then there's Sophia. In the comic book, Carol's daughter, Sophia, she is actually in the Alexandria arc. She is still alive in the Alexandria arc to the point where she is actually adopted by Maggie and Glenn in the comics. So, in the comic books, Sophia is the one alive in the Alexandria arc, but Carol's already dead. But in the show, Sophia's dead and Carol's the one in the Alexandria arc. So they swapped Carol and her daughter Sophia from the comic to the show. Because in the comic, Carol's the one dead first and Sophia's the one in Alexandria. In the show, Carol's the one in Alexandria and Sophia's already dead, right? And then there's Abraham's death being put to Denise instead of himself. So I think maybe they might switch it up, because it'd be way too easy for the show to, for Negan, the show Negan to be killing show Glenn just because it's the same as the comic. It'll be just way too easy just because of that. Okay? Also, I'm also putting off Glenn because of where he's sitting. Yes, Glenn is in fact sitting on the right side of Rick. Because like I said, Maggie, Abraham, Michonne, Daryl, Rosita, and Glenn, they're all on Rick's right side, right? But Glenn, out of everyone on the right side of Rick, Glenn is the furthest away from Rick than everybody else. The one right next to Rick on his right side is Maggie. Next to Maggie, Abraham. Next to Abraham, Michonne. Then Daryl. Then Rosita. And you got Glenn, who is the farthest right of Rick. And if Glenn got hit, there's no way Glenn's blood, I don't care how many times he bashes Glenn, there's no way his blood got all the way to Rick. When you got Maggie, Abraham, Michonne, Daryl, and Rosita in between Rick and Glenn. There's no way that blood got all the way to Rick when he's that far. He's like 5 people separating him and Rick. There's no way his blood, no matter how many times you bash like this, there's no way the blood will go all the way to Rick. There's just no way. Gravity, no. Physics and gravity do not support that unless, the only possibility would be like Negan's all beating Glenn so much, his bat's, Lucille's obviously covered and soaked in blood. He walks over to Rick and he does like this to his bat, and the excess blood like flies off and that goes on his face. But even that doesn't seem plausible, because I may not be an expert on when blood flies off an object and gets on someone's face, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't leave like a smear mark, more like blood spatter, you know what I mean? So that's why I don't think it's Glenn. 1, because it'd be way too obvious because Glenn's the one who died in the comics. 2, they could give Glenn's comic book death to somebody else, just like they gave Abraham's comic book death to Denise. And 3, Glenn is 5 people away from Rick. He may be on the right side of Rick, but he's 5 people away from him. There's no way his blood got on Rick's face if he's that far away, right? So that is why I chose Maggie and Glenn. Oh, and another thing. Some people say it's Glenn. 1, of course, because the people who read the comics know Glenn is the one that gets killed by Negan in the comics. So that's why people think it's him. But another reason why people think that is, again, the carnage. I know some people said that in the carnage they said they think they saw Maggie's ring that Glenn gave her. But a lot of people also think that that object is either Maggie's ring or the pocket watch that Herschel gave to Glenn. Remember that very well-known pocket watch that Herschel had? He gave it to Glenn. They think it's either Maggie's ring or Glenn's pocket watch. That's why a lot of people are spurring it more to Glenn. 1, he died in the comics by Negan. And 2, they think that the item might be either Maggie's ring or the pocket watch. So that's what pretty much spurred that on. Hang on for a sec. I forgot to mention one other thing when it came to Maggie. Another reason why I don't believe Maggie is the victim, like I said, I don't think it's Maggie because, like Negan said, the person fought back after the first hit, and judging by Maggie's frail condition at the end of season 6, she would have never survived at least 1 hit from Lucille, right? And another thing I don't think is Maggie is because she was literally right next to Rick. And if my theory about the victim being on Rick's right side, if the victim was Maggie, there would be more blood right next to Rick's right side, right? And another thing I noticed was, I forgot to mention the third reason why I don't think it's Maggie is because toward the end of the video, like toward the end when you see Negan beating that poor victim, some people have cleared some of the background noise, but some people have claimed that they heard Maggie's voice at the end after Negan killed that person. So that's another reason why I don't think it's Maggie. But anyway, these are my reasons why I believe the Maggie and Glenn could have been the possible kill, at the same time why I don't think it's them. So my next video, my second and number one choices for who Negan killed. Peace, guys.